It started with laughter, not the warm kind that softens a hard day. No, this was the sharp, mocking kind that slices deep, even when it's dressed in casual smirks and beer breath. I was on my porch, same as every Thursday, sipping a mug of chamomile because that's what the doctor says I need instead of coffee. My fingers curled around the cup like it was the last warm thing in my life. And then I heard it, Carl's voice echoing across the trailer park. "Hey, Harold! Appreciate the truck, old man." He was behind the wheel of my '98 Ford, tires spitting gravel as he peeled out of my driveway like he owned the damn thing. Tina was in the passenger seat, laughing with that high-pitched squeal like a raccoon stuck in a blender. Even Rick, the so-called park manager, waved at them as they passed like it was just another day in paradise. I didn't say a word, didn't shout or wave or chase, just sat there, porcelain rattling in my hand, heart beating a little faster than it should. Let me tell you about this place. Maple Pines Mobile Estates. Sounds quaint, right? Like the kind of place where retirees garden and gossip over pie. Hell no. It's a halfway forgotten mud pit on the edge of a dying Midwestern town, the kind of place where hope goes to rust. I've lived here going on 30 years, seen folks come and go, mostly go. But me, I stayed, and somewhere along the line I became what they call that old fool on Lot 9, the guy who'll fix your plumbing for a handshake and a "thanks, Harold." The guy who lends you $50 because you swear you'll pay it back next week, and when you don't, well, Harold just shrugs and smiles. The guy who doesn't lock his tool shed because ain't no one here who'd do me wrong. I believed that. Or maybe I needed to believe it. Needed to think that kindness wasn't just a punchline for the young to mock behind my back. Carl had borrowed my truck a dozen times before, always with some half-assed excuse. Just need to haul some scrap, or gotta help Tina's cousin move. Never asked, just assumed. Tina once used my shower when their water got shut off, left it smelling like vanilla body spray and bleach. Rick, the manager, comes by when something breaks in his place, but the minute I asked about the potholes in front of my lot, "Budget's tight, Harold. You understand?" And I always nodded. Always said, "Sure, Rick. I get it." Because for a long time I thought maybe if I was helpful enough, kind enough, useful enough, they'd remember I existed. Maybe even treat me like something more than background noise. But that Thursday afternoon, something shifted. It wasn't just the truck. It was what they said when they drove off. Carl laughing. "What's he gonna do? Write us a letter? Old man probably can't even see straight." Tina chiming in. "Let him chase us. He'll throw out his back before he hits the mailbox." More laughter. Peeling tires. Then silence. I didn't even sip my tea. Just set the mug down and stared out over the trailer park. It was quiet again. Peaceful, if you didn't know how to listen. But I knew. I knew the rustle behind the blinds in Martha's window meant she'd been watching too. Knew the flicker of Rick's curtains meant he saw it all, chose to stay seated. And I knew that when Carl returned the truck, probably empty on gas and with the passenger door creaking worse than before, he'd grin and say something like, "Did you miss her?" And I'd be expected to chuckle. That used to be enough for me. A little chuckle, a little normalcy, but not anymore. I walked back into my trailer, the screen door wheezing shut behind me. The place smelled like old wood and older memories. My wife's photo still sat above the fireplace, June, smiling like the world had never been cruel to her. She'd passed 5 years back. Cancer, fast and merciless. After her, I stayed because I didn't know where else to go. The trailer was cheap, the town familiar, and the neighbors, well, they were people. People I thought I understood. But as I stared at her photo, A question rose in my chest like a splinter working its way to the surface. What if I wasn't the fool? What if they were? That's when the hum started. Not in the air, but in me. A slow, buzzing clarity, like the moment before a storm when the sky turns the color of old bruises. I wasn't angry. That would have been too easy. No, I was awake. Fully. Painfully. For the first time in years. I walked to the small desk in the corner, dust-covered, unused since June passed. I pulled open the drawer and found an old notebook, yellowed pages, half filled with grocery lists and dog-eared crossword puzzles. I flipped it open and turned to a fresh page. With a steady hand, I wrote at the top, Carl owes $240, mechanic debt. Then, Tina, shop rumors, multiple enemies. Then, Rick, park funds, missing repairs, possible theft. I stared at the page, then kept writing. Names, debts, favors, secrets whispered too close to my porch when they thought I wasn't listening. A map of their selfishness, their carelessness, their casual cruelty. And then, at the bottom of the page, in all capital letters, I wrote, They think I'm a fool. Let's see who's laughing last. I closed the notebook, set it gently beside the lamp, and walked back to the porch, where the tea had gone cold, and the air smelled like cut grass and gasoline. I sat, I waited, and I smiled. Because the old man they laughed at, he was just getting started. It's strange what silence can teach a man. After that Thursday, I stopped opening the door when they knocked. Not right away. At first, I'd still get up from my recliner, make it halfway across the living room before pausing, hand hovering above the doorknob, that old reflex still twitching. But I'd stare at the peeling white paint on the door and think, what's the point? Let 'em knock. Let 'em walk away. The first few days I just sat and watched. Not TV. That damn thing's been busted since 18 and I never bothered to fix it. No, I watched them. From the window, through the blinds, sipping lukewarm tea and letting the afternoon sun creep across the carpet like a lazy cat. Tina's hair salon trailer buzzed every morning by 9 a.m. She always wore too much perfume, like she was trying to cover up the stink of secrets. I saw Carl stumble out of Lot 6 most mornings, grease under his fingernails, cursing at an engine that hadn't run in months. And Rick, well, Rick strutted around the park like he owned it, clipboard in hand, that fake smile plastered on for tenants but never quite reaching his eyes. They didn't know I was watching. They never do. Everyone thinks old age means blindness, but you'd be surprised what gets sharper when the world stops caring if you see it. I pulled out the notebook every night after dinner. The desk lamp cast long shadows across the page, but the writing, my writing, was steady, precise. This wasn't a journal. This was a record, a ledger of human rot dressed in hand-me-downs and charm. Page 4, Rick, manager. Late night visitor on 9/17, unidentified. Took 3 envelopes from Lot 2 mailbox, not his. Same excuse for potholes given 3x to 3 tenants. Lying, likely. Page 6, Tina. Told Martha she was going under financially. Same day, bought new hairdryer set, 300 plus. Regular contact with Carl despite telling Rick he creeps me out. Page 8, Carl. Borrowed jumper cables from me. Never returned. Has my crescent wrench. Been 11 weeks. Caught on camera, porch cam, using my truck again 2 nights ago. No ask, no thanks. That notebook grew fatter by the day. I didn't even have to leave my porch anymore. Just sit still long enough and the truth would come crawling out like bugs from rotten wood. But it wasn't enough to watch. Not anymore. I needed a plan. Direct confrontation wasn't going to work. You yell at a man like Carl and he just laughs, throws a beer can in your yard. Yell at Tina, and suddenly you're the one being aggressive. Rick? He'd smile, nod, then fine you for some bullshit code violation. No, I didn't want to fight. I wanted something quieter, something permanent. Let them think I'd finally gone full senile. Let them keep underestimating me. After all, the old fool label had its perks. People let things slip around you. They don't censor themselves. They don't think to hide their sins from the man who's just too old to get it. But I got it. I saw everything. One night, I sat in the recliner with my dinner, just a grilled cheese and canned soup, and watched shadows move across my ceiling fan. The house creaked. The walls whispered in that way they do when the weather's turning. And that's when I said it out loud. Let them devour each other. Not in a dramatic movie kind of way, just a quiet murmur, like a prayer or a curse. I didn't want to fight fire with fire. I wanted to watch them burn each other down. That was the plan. Not vengeance in the loud, angry way. This would be slow, surgical. I closed the notebook, set it gently on the table like it was something holy, and reached for the old tape recorder in the drawer. Still worked. Still had a few blank tapes left. I clicked it on, the hiss of the magnetic tape like static snow in my ears. Journal entry, October 3rd, 11:14 p.m. Carl, Tina, Rick. Each one owes. Each one feeds off the other. Favors, lies, quiet thefts. I've spent the last 30 years pretending not to notice. That ends now. I will not confront. I will observe, then suggest, whisper, tip the balance. No violence, no threats, just seeds. Let them plant their own doom. They'll never see me coming. I clicked the recorder off. The smile that pulled at my mouth felt foreign at first. Stiff, unused muscle. But it grew. Not out of cruelty, no. Out of certainty. Out of something that had been buried for a long time and was now rising, like roots breaking concrete. The next morning, I opened the blinds. Carl was already pacing in his driveway, cussing at a busted alternator. Tina's door was open, letting out the scent of burned hair dye and desperation. Rick walked by sipping a gas station coffee, eyes scanning the park like a landlord instead of a manager. And me? I sipped my tea, smiled, because I had the one thing none of them did anymore: time. It started, as most bad things do, with a whisper. The paper was plain, torn from the middle of an old notepad, the kind you find shoved between expired coupons and broken pens in a drawer that hasn't been cleaned since '04. I wrote it carefully, block letters, no signature, no flourish, just the right amount of sting. Ask Tina why she's telling people you steal car parts from your clients. People are starting to believe her. I folded it twice, slipped it into a blank envelope I'd steamed open from one of my electric bills. No fingerprints, no mistakes. The glue tasted like dust and regret. I licked it shut anyway. Carl's mailbox was easy to reach. Lot 6, blue siding, a busted screen door, and a pit bull named Brisket, who barked like a demon but wouldn't hurt a fly unless you were holding a pork chop. Carl didn't believe in locks, not for his doors, not for his drawers, not even for his garage, which sat open half the time like a drunk yawn. I waited until he left for the hardware store, like he did every Wednesday at 10 a.m. sharp, part habit, part flirtation with the woman behind the paint counter. I slipped the letter in and walked off like I was going to check my propane tank. By noon, the wind had changed. I was sitting on the porch, cleaning my old thermos with vinegar when I saw him storming down the gravel path. Carl's neck was red, which meant either he was drunk or angry, or both. I watched his boots kick up dust as he made a beeline for Tina's place. Tina's salon trailer had one of those glittery decals on the window. Therapy by Tina, cut, color, confidence. Confidence was not on the menu today. He pounded the door twice. It swung open hard enough to slap the siding. "You got something to say to me. Say it to my face," Carl barked. Tina stepped out in those leopard print leggings she thought made her look 20 again, her smock streaked with blonde dye. "What the hell are you talking about? You running your damn mouth about my shop? You telling people I skim off parts?" Tina blinked, then squinted. "Who told you that? That ain't a denial. I don't have time for your—" She started, but Carl stepped forward. Too close. Too loud. "You think you're better than me? Your rent's 3 months late and you're telling people I'm a thief?" "I said no such thing," she snapped, but her voice cracked like cheap vinyl. "If anyone's been talking, it's Rick. He's the one with eyes everywhere." I watched it all from behind my sunglasses, thermos in hand, like I was watching birds at a feeder. She slammed the door. Carl stomped away, cursing under his breath, and nearly tripped over a garden hose. The seed had sprouted. By that evening, the whole park buzzed with whispers. You could feel it in the way people shut their blinds faster, in how long they stared at each other's trailers before knocking. That night at the laundry shed, I overheard Martha telling Dolores that Carl and Tina had a falling out. She said it with that breathy, excited tone that women of a certain age only use when something breaks in someone else's life. Nobody knew where the rumor started. And that's the beauty of it. You plant the right seed in the right soil, and the roots do the rest. But this wasn't about Carl or Tina. Not really. This was about balance. About tilting the scales just enough that people stopped looking at me like I was the community tool belt and started looking at each other like maybe they were the problem. The next morning, I saw Carl in his driveway, wiping down a rusted carburetor like it owed him an apology. He kept glancing toward Tina's trailer like it might explode. She, meanwhile, walked past his lot on the way to the communal mailbox, chin high, lips tight, like a woman who was ready to scratch a man's name off a list and replace it with a hex. I sat on my porch, poured coffee into my thermos even though I hadn't added cream, just black and bitter, like the mood out here. And for the first time in years, no one asked to borrow my tools. No one waved. I was invisible again, and this time it was intentional. That afternoon, I went inside and opened the notebook. Page 12. Tension, Carl and Tina, high. Carl, likely to escalate, hot-headed, watch for retaliation. Tina, paranoid under pressure, useful, leverage possible. I flipped to the back and added a new list. Potentials for Phase 2. Rick, too quiet lately, probably watching the Tina-Carl drama unfold. Martha, financial stress, might be useful. Dolores, gossip vector, feed her select info. This wasn't revenge, not exactly. I wasn't keying cars or slashing tires. I was just tilting, nudging the stones already rolling downhill. They dug their own graves long ago. I was just handing out shovels, and no one suspected a thing. Not the old man on Lot 9, not Harold the Fool. They thought I was sipping tea and watching birds. But what I was really watching was the storm I just started to summon. You'd be amazed at how much damage can be done by the word, huh? Just a little sound, a twitch of curiosity, a spark lit slow and quiet. But in a place like Maple Pines, where boredom hangs like wet laundry and folks run their mouths more than their engines, huh, can set the whole park smoldering. Tina showed up at my porch 3 days after her blowout with Carl. I heard her before I saw her, heels clicking on the gravel like she was trying to outstomp her own rage. She was dressed for war. Big sunglasses, too much lipstick, and a cloud of drugstore perfume that stung my eyes from 6 feet away. "You seen Carl lately?" she asked, arms crossed tight like she was holding herself together by force. I looked up from my crossword and offered a slow shrug. "Saw him walking down toward the dumpster this morning." She clicked her tongue. "Probably looking for where he threw his reputation." I nodded. Shame. Never thought he'd go after someone who helped him so much. She blinked behind her sunglasses. What do you mean? Another shrug. Another calculated pause. Well, I said, tapping my pen against the paper like I was thinking too hard. Maybe I shouldn't say anything. Just thought it was odd, that's all. Seeing him with Rick so late. Tina's whole body tilted forward like a hawk catching wind. Rick? She asked, voice sharp enough to slice toast. What do you mean late? I kept my tone soft, almost apologetic. Might have been nothing. But Tuesday night, around 11 maybe, I was up refilling the bird feeder. Those raccoons been getting bold lately, and I saw Carl and Rick talking by the community shed. Real hushed. Real close. Her lips thinned. Rick and Carl? Could have been about plumbing, I said innocently. But I don't know why you'd need a flashlight and a whisper for that. I could see it then, that seed drop into the soil behind her eyes. She didn't say anything else, just muttered something about needing to get back to work and marched off, her heels stabbing divots into the dirt. I sipped my coffee and flipped to a new page in the notebook. Page 18. Tina suspects Rick. Watch for blowback. By that evening, the rumor mill was already wheezing to life. I was in the laundry shed folding socks when Martha shuffled in, her arms loaded with faded bedsheets. She smelled like mothballs and menthol, and she never could resist a little drama. You hear what Tina said? She asked, voice lowered like she was slipping state secrets into my ear. I shook my head. Nope. She told Dolores that Rick's been siphoning money from the maintenance fund. Said he's been using Carl to cover his tracks. Really? I asked, letting just enough disbelief creep into my tone. Oh, yeah. Said she's got receipts. Says Rick had the parks funds redirected to some personal account and Carl's been his runner. I let out a low whistle. That'd be a hell of a thing if true. Martha leaned in like a conspirator. Between you and me, I always thought Rick was too smooth, smiles too easy, like a fox pretending to be a damn puppy. I nodded, folding another sock. You're not wrong. That was all it took. The next day, Rick came knocking. I opened the door slow. He stood there in his khakis and park-issued polo, clipboard in hand, that forced grin sitting uneasy on his face. Morning, Harold, he said. Mind if I ask you something? I leaned on the door frame. Shoot. You been talking to Tina lately? Why? She's spreading some misinformation, he said, each syllable tight like it had been ironed. Said I've been stealing from the park. That so? I said, as if it were news. He squinted at me. You didn't tell her anything, did you? I chuckled. Rick, I barely leave the porch. He didn't believe me. Not really. But he couldn't prove a thing. As he walked off, I saw Carl watching from his porch, arms folded, jaw tight. And Tina? She stood at her trailer's window, sipping a can of Diet Right like it was victory champagne. They were all watching each other now, second-guessing, distrusting. I'd stirred the pot just right. The next move was to let it boil. I waited 2 days. Then I dropped a hint to Rick. I found him inspecting the community tool shed, fake measuring something with a bent tape measure. I walked up slow, whistling like I had nothing on my mind. You ever notice Carl's been parking over at Lot 2 at night? I asked. He looked up, caught off guard. Lot 2? That place has been empty since Jerry moved out. Exactly, I said, tapping my nose. Strange, huh? And just like that, the seed was in his head now, too. Rick might be smooth, but he was proud. The kind of man who smiles at you while wondering how much he could charge you for picking up your own mail. Carl parking in an empty lot? That meant secrets. That meant side deals. That meant... Maybe Tina wasn't entirely wrong. I watched him chew on it. watched it curdle into suspicion. That evening, Carl's truck didn't move. The next morning, Tina's sign wasn't in the salon window. And Rick? He spent most of the day in the office, blinds drawn, phone pressed to his ear. The pot was simmering now, bubbling thick and angry. And I sat back on my porch, lit a cinnamon-scented candle June had once loved, and wrote 3 simple words in my notebook. Chaos loves company. You can tell a lot about a person by the way they ask for money. Some folks come hat in hand, eyes low, words soft. Others swagger in, call it a loan, a short-term fix, a favor to be repaid when things level out. But Martha was the kind that asked like it was already yours, and she was just doing you the kindness of letting you give it back. She came over on a Friday morning, windbreaker zipped halfway, hair tied back with a red bandana she wore like a crown. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired from yard work or chasing grandkids, the kind of tired that lived behind the eyes, set deep in the bones. "Harold," she said, standing just off my steps, "could I ask you something?" I motioned to the porch chair beside me. "Sure." She sat, took a breath. "I hate to ask, I really do. But I'm a little short this week. Lot rent came due and my pension got messed up. They said it'll be sorted by next month." I didn't blink, didn't ask questions, just reached into the cookie tin where I kept my loose bills and counted out $50, folded it once, handed it over. Martha's eyes welled up, just a little. "I swear I'll pay you back." I nodded. "Don't worry about it." And I meant that, mostly because I already knew she wouldn't. As soon as she left, I stood, walked inside, opened the notebook. Page 22, Martha, borrowed $50. Claim, pension issue. Actual, gambling debt. Overheard Carl say, "Martha's back at the machines last week." I didn't loan Martha that money because I was kind. That version of me died somewhere between Carl's last laugh and Tina's last lie. No, I gave her that money because I needed the next domino to fall. And Martha, bless her compulsive little heart, was always the first to topple. I waited until Monday. Then I visited Rick. Now, Rick didn't like visitors. Not since Tina's rumor started circling like vultures. He kept his office locked, blinds drawn, a little bell on the inside that dinged whenever the door opened. But that morning, I caught him out front fumbling with the fuse box, cursing about power surges and cheap wiring. "Morning," I said casually. He grunted, not looking up. "Say, I heard something the other day," I continued, leaning on the railing like we were just 2 old buddies chewing fat. "Yeah?" "Martha," I said, "told Tina she's sitting on a pile of money, playing broke so the park doesn't expect her to pay full rent." Rick looked up then, eyes sharp. "She said that?" "Word for word," I lied. "Said she keeps cash in coffee cans and tells folks it's all gone so no one comes knocking." He shook his head. Unbelievable. I gave him a shrug and wandered off like I had nothing more to add. That night, under the flickering light of my porch lamp, I saw Rick march right up to Martha's door, clipboard in hand, face stormy. She opened it in her robe, still chewing whatever late-night snack she'd been nursing. They argued. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone was clear as daylight. Accusation, denial, escalation. Martha's voice rose, shrill, defensive, cracking. Then came the words that pierced the quiet of the whole park. "Are you harassing me, Rick? Is that what this is?" Rick backed off, hands raised, trying to talk her down. But once a woman like Martha starts yelling, "Harassment," it doesn't matter who's holding the clipboard. Curtains fluttered across the trailer park. People peeked out. By the next morning, Martha had told anyone who'd listened that Rick was abusing his power, targeting widows, and threatening eviction without cause. I helped it along, of course. At the mail shed, I mentioned casually to Dolores, Funny how Rick's after Martha now, huh? Soon as she asked about the maintenance fund, Dolores gasped, hand to her chest like she'd just heard the end of a soap opera. Do you think he's retaliating? Wouldn't be the first time someone in charge used their weight the wrong way. By sunset, the gossip was galloping. That evening, I noted it in the ledger. Page 26. Rick versus Martha. Open conflict. Park sentiment turning. Martha emotional, unpredictable. Rick defensive. I watched it all unravel like a blanket with one loose thread. Carl stopped by Martha's the next day. Something about a busted water heater. She sent him away. Said she wasn't paying for favors from Rick's little spies. Carl, of course, didn't take that kindly. He stomped away, muttering about ungrateful freeloaders. Now all three were tangled. Martha, Rick, Carl. Each one convinced the others were plotting. And me? I was just Harold. Harmless Harold. The man who lent $50, offered porch advice, and didn't ask for much. They still hadn't figured out I was the one tilting the whole park on its side like a snow globe, shaking it just enough to make things swirl. That night, I sipped a glass of warm cider and wrote one line across the top of a fresh page. Trust is like China. Once cracked, it never rings the same again. The park was humming now, mistrust hanging thick in the air like smoke, and we hadn't even reached the breaking point. It's funny how something small can set a whole life on fire. A key, for example, just a little hunk of metal with teeth and a hole at one end. But if you know where to place it and when, it can split a house down the middle and maybe take a man with it. Carl left his garage wide open that week. He always did. Said locks were for people with something to hide. A man like that doesn't imagine anyone's watching, let alone thinking 3 moves ahead. But I was, and I had been. It started with a spare set of keys. Rick was the kind of fool who kept everything labeled. I'd seen him drop them once, a big brass ring of park keys, jangling like a tambourine in a marching band. On the tag for his truck key, a faded white label that read, Lot 1, Manager's Chevy in black Sharpie. I'd only needed 5 seconds near the shed door to lift it off the hook. And a week later, I tucked that very key beneath a loose board in Carl's garage, nestled between a rusted air filter and a jar of ancient bolts. Then I waited. I waited until Friday night, when Rick had his weekly poker game in town. Left his truck parked out front, same as always. I crept out at 1:14 a.m., wearing my old gardening gloves and that black hoodie June once said made me look like a lost raccoon. Took me all of 20 seconds to start the truck, roll it quietly out of the driveway, and guide it 3 blocks east to the old abandoned dairy barn behind the tree line. Nobody used that barn anymore, not since the roof collapsed in '03. It sat like a forgotten relic, dry and empty, waiting for a secret to keep. I left the truck there, locked it, pocketed the key, and walked home under the moonlight, heart calm, breath even, like I'd just taken out the trash. By morning, the rumors had bloomed like wildflowers in a graveyard. Rick's truck, gone. He was furious, of course. Woke half the park with his shouting, accused everyone, threatened to call the sheriff, swore it had to be Carl, said Carl had motive, history, tools, and a mean streak longer than a winter storm. Carl didn't take that well. He marched across the lawn in dirty jeans and boots still wet from God knows what, and screamed across Rick's driveway like he was on fire. You think I'd steal your rust bucket? You think I need your piece of shit truck? You're the only one with the balls in the garage space, Rick shouted back. You got half the damn park's engines in there. Don't act like you don't know how. I sat on my porch with my usual mug of tea and watched it unfold like live theater. Neighbors stepped out in bathrobes, hair curlers, slippers. Some stayed back behind their blinds, sipping their own drinks, watching without blinking. The park had been restless for weeks. All it needed was a spark. This, this was a bonfire. Rick stormed toward Carl's trailer, shouting about calling the cops. Carl beat him to it. "I got nothing to hide," Carl roared. "Come search my damn garage. Hell, maybe check Tina's place while you're at it, since y'all been so chummy lately." And just like that, Tina was back in it. She came out swearing, hair wet, face flushed, bathrobe tied half-assed around her waist. "Don't drag me into your damn testosterone contest," Carl sneered. "Guess you don't like being caught, huh?" Rick turned on her then. "You knew about this? Don't you dare put this on me, Rick." Now all three were yelling. Rick accused Carl of theft. Carl accused Rick of planting the whole thing to make him look guilty. Tina accused them both of dragging her reputation through the dirt. And the park? The park was soaking it all in like gasoline. By the time the police showed up, blue lights painting the trailers like a crime scene, Carl was red-faced and foaming. Rick kept repeating himself like a man trying to rewrite history with volume. Tina was crying, mascara streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. The cops searched Carl's place first. Didn't find the truck. Of course they didn't. But they did find Rick's key, stuffed in a jar of bolts under that loose board in the garage. Carl swore up and down he'd never seen it before. Tina gasped. Rick crossed his arms with that smug little "I knew it" grin. They didn't arrest Carl. Not yet. But they sure as hell took a statement. Promised to look into it. And when the cops drove off, the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure. It was a fault line, stretched and waiting. Later that night, I saw Carl pacing like a caged animal, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. Rick stood at the edge of his lot like a sentry, arms folded, face stone. Tina's lights never came on. From my porch, I watched the wreckage settle. 3 neighbors, 3 egos, 3 loaded pistols of anger, pride, and paranoia, cocked and aimed at one another. And me? I just smiled into my tea and flipped the page of my notebook. Page 31, truck incident, complete, key planted, truck hidden, police involved. Outcome, Rick escalates, Carl furious, Tina isolated. I underlined the next note 3 times. They're past the point of no return. It's a curious thing, how people break. Not in loud cinematic crashes like you see in movies. No. Real breaking is quiet. It begins with sleepless nights, missed calls, whispered doubts. Then one day, a man you've known for years punches a wall because someone left their trash can on his side of the property line. That was Carl last Tuesday. It was 7:43 a.m. I remember the exact time because the birds had only just started chirping, and I'd barely had 2 sips of my morning tea. Carl came storming out of his trailer in a wrinkled t-shirt and boots he hadn't laced, yelling at nothing and everything. The trash can sat on the edge of his lot, barely touching his patch of gravel. But to Carl, that was war. He screamed about boundaries and respect and people treating me like I'm the damn villain. Then, with a grunt, he kicked the can so hard it bounced off Rick's tool shed, dented the siding, and exploded garbage across the path. Rick, of course, was already outside. Had been since dawn, tinkering with the new security camera he'd mounted on a 10-foot pole, pointed directly at Carl's garage. "What the hell are you doing?" Rick shouted. Carl charged across the lawn like a man possessed. "Move that camera or I'll shove it down your throat," Rick laughed. "You touch my property and I'll have you locked up before breakfast." I leaned back in my rocking chair, watching it all unfold like a morning soap opera. Then Tina came out. "Will you both shut the hell up?" she screamed, barefoot, her bathrobe flapping in the wind. "You're scaring my clients away before they even show up." Rick turned on her. "Oh, please, you haven't had a paying customer since August." Carl, still seething, took the moment to snarl. You two deserve each other. That was Tuesday. By Wednesday, half the park had picked a side. Martha wouldn't speak to Tina anymore, said she was in cahoots with a known thief. Dolores declared Carl was a hot-headed lunatic and told everyone at bingo night that Rick was just trying to keep order. But even she didn't believe it. I fanned the flames with precision. At the community bulletin board, I accidentally switched two envelopes, Tina's electric bill and Carl's final notice from the DMV. When Carl read the notice of service disconnection, he stormed back to his trailer, tore through his drawers, then marched to Tina's place and pounded on the door. "You think this is funny?" he yelled, waving the envelope in her face. Tina blinked. "That's not even yours." Rick showed up 5 minutes later, clipboard in hand, trying to mediate. Carl shoved him. Tina screamed. Someone called the police again. The next day, I saw something even better. Martha slipped out of her trailer and walked straight to the sheriff's cruiser parked at the far end of the lot. She leaned in and talked low, waving her hands like she was filing a report. I made sure to be in earshot when Dolores passed by. "Poor thing," I said softly. "All that pressure's got her thinking Tina's running some kind of illegal business out of that salon." Dolores gasped. "Like, under-the-table stuff?" I gave a half shrug. "Could be. Hair extensions, backroom sales, maybe even, well, you know how people talk." She didn't need more than that. By noon, 3 people had called the city office, anonymously requesting an inspection of Tina's business license. The police didn't show up that day, but a white government vehicle did. Some poor woman in a blazer knocked on Tina's door with a clipboard and a set of questions. Tina's response? A screaming match that could be heard across 4 lots. She accused Rick of setting her up, said she'd sue the whole park. The woman left shaken. Tina went inside, slammed the door, and didn't come back out for hours. That evening, Carl did the inevitable. He broke into Rick's shed. I saw him do it. Quiet, fast, just after sunset, when the sky was that perfect bruised purple. He used a crowbar, not subtle. I watched from my window, curtain barely cracked, heart calm. He found something in there. I don't know what exactly, but whatever it was, it sent him into a tailspin. Because the next morning, he confronted Rick in front of the entire park. "You son of a bitch," he growled, holding up a manila folder. "You keeping records on people? On me?" Rick didn't deny it. "Gotta protect myself. From people like you." Tina was walking by when she heard that. "What do you mean, people like him? You keeping records on all of us?" Rick hesitated. That pause, that millisecond of frozen guilt, it was all she needed. "You are," she shouted. "You've been spying on us." Carl tore up the folder right there, flinging scraps into the wind like confetti. That night, I sat on my porch, notebook in my lap. Page 37, The Park Fractures. Carl, unstable. Rick, exposed. Tina, paranoid. Martha filing complaints. Dolores repeating everything. I smiled. All it had taken was a few whispers, a missing truck, one misdelivered bill, and a key in the wrong place. They'd done the rest themselves, and it wasn't over. Not even close. The screaming started before sunrise. Not the startled kind, not even the wounded kind. No, this was primal. The kind of sound that drags your bones to attention, that cracks open the morning like a shotgun blast. I was already awake, as usual, watching the steam from my coffee curl like smoke signals from another life. I stepped onto the porch in my slippers, just in time to see Carl charging across the lawn, shirtless, barefoot, and wielding a rusted wrench like a damn war club. Rick was on his porch, arms crossed, eyes like glass. Calm, too calm, like a man who'd rehearsed this moment in the mirror. You son of a bitch, Carl screamed, pointing the wrench at Rick's chest. You been in my trailer? You cut my cables? Rick didn't blink. I haven't touched your damn trailer. Then why was my power cut again, huh? And why'd I find your name on the service slip? Because you haven't paid rent in 2 months. I gave you cash, Rick, in a fucking envelope just like you asked. Oh, that envelope, Rick said, voice flat. I must have lost it. Carl let out a howl. Not rage, not pain, but something messier, more fractured, like betrayal was catching in his throat. And then he swung. The wrench hit Rick's shed door with a thunderclap, missed Rick's head by inches. Rick stumbled backward, arms up, but he didn't run. He laughed. You want to go to jail, Carl? You really want to finish what you started? By then, doors were opening across the park. Tina peeked out, mascara smudged from sleep, a ratty robe clinging to her like tissue paper. Martha and Dolores stood on their stoops, mouths agape, clutching coffee mugs like they were crucifixes. And then came Tina's moment. She marched across the lot in cheap sandals, wild-eyed and shaking. Are you proud of yourselves? She shouted. You've turned this place into a damn zoo. Rick glared at her. Maybe if you weren't hiding half your business under the table, we wouldn't be in this mess. Tina threw her arms up. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoy living in a soap opera? You started this, Carl growled, with your big fucking mouth. Oh, I started it, she snapped. Was it me who took Rick's truck? Was it me who planted the key in your garage? And just like that, the crowd shifted. Whispers rippled through the air. I heard Martha gasp. Dolores muttered something about planting evidence. Rick turned sharply to Carl. You told her about the key? Carl shook his head. No, I didn't. How the hell does she know? They both looked at Tina, who froze. No one was supposed to know about that, Rick said, stepping closer. Unless you were the one who... Don't you dare, Tina snapped. You're the snake in this grass. Always have been. Martha chose that moment to speak. I told the sheriff about your salon, Tina. About the whispers. Tina spun around. You? After all I've done for you? All you've done is lie. And that's when Tina slapped her. A loud, wet crack that silenced everything for a full second. Martha stumbled backward, eyes wide, hand to her cheek. Dolores screamed, and then Rick lunged at Carl, and the two men collided in a mess of fists and elbows and gravel. They rolled through a flower bed, knocked over a gnome, Carl's wrench clattering to the dirt. Rick landed a punch to Carl's ribs. Carl bit Rick's shoulder. Someone yelled, "Call the police!" And I didn't even turn my head. I just sat, watching, drinking, enjoying. By the time the sheriff arrived, same deputy as before, a kid barely old enough to shave. Carl's lip was bleeding, Rick's shirt was torn, and Tina had locked herself in her salon with the blinds pulled shut. The sheriff didn't even ask questions this time, just took statements, took names, and left everyone with stern warnings and tight-lipped stares. But the damage was done. The trailer park was no longer a community. It was a battlefield. Neighbors stopped waving. Lawn chairs vanished from porches. People stopped helping each other carry groceries, stopped chatting at the mailbox, stopped smiling. You could feel it, the buzz, the electricity, like a thunderstorm brewing under the gravel. And still, not one of them suspected me. Not the old fool on Lot 9, not the man with the mug of tea and the too polite nod and the quiet porch. That night I lit a candle in the window, not for warmth but for ceremony. I opened my notebook. Page 41, event log, fight, Rick versus Carl, slap, Tina versus Martha, police present, outcome, trust shattered, park morale, critical. I added a new line beneath it. The orchestra has lost its conductor. They're playing in chaos now, and I meant it. No more alliances, no more sides, just suspicion, betrayal, and the slow, steady rot of what used to be. And I kept the tempo. After the storm, there's always a hush, but the kind of silence that settled over Maple Pines wasn't peace. It was the silence of shattered glass after the fall, of a house that's still standing but missing its heart. The kind of quiet that hums behind your ears, pressing against your skull like it wants in. The day after the brawl, nobody came outside. No lawnmowers, no gossip at the mailbox, no porch coffee. Even Brisket, Carl's dog, didn't bark that morning, and that mutt barked at dandelions. I sat on my porch like always, rocking slowly, tea cooling in the mug, my notebook resting on the armrest, open but untouched. There was nothing to write. Not yet. The machine was running on its own now. Rick stopped doing his rounds. His clipboard disappeared. The camera he'd installed, the one that had once blinked red with authority, now hung crooked, dead-eyed, and still. I saw him once through his window, pacing in a stained tank top, talking to no one. Tina kept her blinds closed. The once busy buzz of hairdryers and cheap radio pop had gone silent. Her Therapy by Tina sign had been pulled down and tossed behind the trailer. A broken comb lay on the welcome mat like a forgotten relic. And Carl? Carl stayed inside. Not a single cigarette break. No wrench clanging in the garage. Just the occasional creak of floorboards and the blue flicker of late-night television through the curtain. Even Martha stopped her morning walks. She used to do 2 laps around the park every sunrise, called it keeping the blood moving. But now she only peeked through the blinds. I saw her once, squinting at Tina's trailer like it might catch fire. No one borrowed sugar. No one returned tools. No one spoke. It was everything I wanted, and nothing I expected, because in the quiet, something else creeped in. Shame, maybe. Not mine. Theirs. I didn't feel shame. I felt clarity. They were finally seeing each other for what they were, and themselves. But the weight of it? It was heavy. Heavier than I thought it'd be. I didn't interfere anymore. Didn't plant notes. Didn't whisper rumors. I stopped moving pieces, because I didn't need to. They'd all drawn their own weapons and pointed them inward. That week, I sold the truck. An old guy from 2 towns over came by, saw the for sale sign I'd taped to the back window, paid cash, didn't ask questions, just handed me a thick envelope, checked the oil, and drove off like it had never belonged to me. Perfect. No trace. I pocketed the cash and sat back down on my porch, listening to the gravel settle. Rick posted a sign the next day. One of those cheap plastic ones you buy at Office Depot. Lot manager position, pending transfer, contact corporate. He didn't say goodbye, just packed a single duffel bag into a borrowed car and drove off without looking back. I watched him go from behind my curtain. 2 days later, Tina's salon trailer went dark permanently. No lights, no music, no movement. Her car was gone the next morning. I think she left at night. Didn't even bother to sell the place, just bailed. Carl took longer. He sat in the wreckage for a week, maybe more. Then one morning, I saw him hauling boxes to the curb. Not organized, not labeled, just tossed, as if none of it mattered. He left the garage open, left his tools behind, even Brisket. The dog sat at the edge of the driveway, confused, until someone from Lot 12 came and took him in. Carl didn't say goodbye either. By the end of the month, 3 trailers sat empty. Rick's office was padlocked. Tina's blinds were still drawn. Carl's front door hung slightly open, creaking in the wind. Maple Pines had always been quiet, but now it was haunted. And I remained, the old fool on Lot 9. I trimmed my hedges, fed the birds, repainted the steps in a calm gray. People still didn't wave, but they glanced my way a little more often, like maybe I'd always been the quiet center of this place, the rock, the observer. They had no idea. One evening just after sunset, I opened my notebook for the last time. The cover was worn now, corners soft from use, pages filled with notes, maps, observations, tiny confessions scribbled in the margins. I flipped to the back. The final page, blank. I picked up my pen and wrote, "Let them devour each other." Then beneath it, they did. I closed the notebook, set it gently on the table beside my chair. The wind rustled the leaves, the way it used to when June was still alive and humming in the kitchen. I looked up at the stars, crisp, clear, and quiet. Perfect silence, not forced, earned. It was sometime in late November when I realized no one had knocked on my door in over 6 weeks. Not for a hammer, not for sugar, not to bum a ride or ask for just a little loan till Friday. The silence wasn't new anymore. It had settled over Maple Pines like an old blanket, dusty but warm in its own way. I kept waiting for the guilt. It never came. Instead, there was a strange peace in the stillness, a kind of quiet order to the chaos I'd left behind. I trimmed my hedges every Wednesday, took out my trash on time, fed the birds that came to visit the cracked ceramic feeder June painted years ago. The rest of the park had changed. Carl's old trailer stayed empty. The new management tried to list it once, but no one bit. Word gets around fast in small towns, especially when it comes to places where men once screamed at each other like wolves. His tools rusted out back. Brisket, now living 2 lots down with a retired school teacher named Gladys, didn't so much as look in that direction anymore. Tina's salon? Converted into storage. Someone stuck a "for lease" sign in the window, but it tilted sideways after a storm and no one bothered to fix it. You could still see the outline of her old sign on the window, Harapy by Tina, faded but stubborn. Rick's lot was swallowed up by the corporation that owned the park. A new guy came in, a real clipboard and laptop type. Young, too clean for the job. He wore branded polos and asked too many questions at first. I didn't tell him anything, and after a while he stopped asking. The others who had watched it all go down, the ones who had whispered, nodded, even laughed when Carl shouted or Tina stormed out of her trailer, they had gone quiet too. Dolores kept to her porch, clutching a Bible she never used to carry. Martha? She started gardening of all things, grew tomatoes in little planter boxes along the side of her lot. She never offered me one. Fine by me. I wasn't in it for thanks. I never was. One afternoon, I took out the notebook. I hadn't opened it since the night I wrote the final line. They did. The pages still smelled faintly of ink and old coffee. I flipped through slowly. Names, arrows, dates, little maps of where people went, what they said, who owed who. And then, at the very back, under the final entry, I added one last note. They were never friends. I just helped them see it. Then I closed the notebook and burned it, not ceremoniously, just in the old metal fire drum behind the trailer, same one I used for leaves and cardboard. The pages caught quick, curled in on themselves like secrets finally exhaled. When it was done, I scattered the ashes in the garden where the birds liked to peck. Let the wind carry the rest. I didn't need it anymore. The real record was in the air, in the cracks of conversation, in the empty chairs at the community center, in the quiet way people now walked past one another like ghosts. That was my work. Not vengeance, not punishment, just truth. People like Carl, Tina, Rick, they'd built their lives on little lies, on shaky handshakes and fake smiles. I didn't invent the rot. I just peeled back the drywall and let the mold breathe. And they couldn't handle the air. The final movement wasn't loud. It didn't end with police sirens or fires or some grand confession. It ended with me on my porch, alone, content, invisible again, but this time on purpose. Sometimes neighbors still glance at me, like they remember something they can't quite place. They nod, half smile. Maybe they think I'm lucky for not getting caught in the blast. Maybe they still believe I was just Harold, the quiet old fool who happened to survive the collapse. Let them believe that. Truth is, I didn't just survive it. I wrote the whole damn symphony, and then I sat back and listened.